second lecture, somatosensation. I'll just tell you that what we're going to do today is not introduction, an overview of what we talked about last time very briefly, and then again not too deep into the central somatosensory system, but a little bit more in details about the whisker system, which is a model system that most people today use to study the somatosensory system. So I'll give you some introduction about the system itself and then some application about it. So last time we talked about somatosensation, what it means. We said that it is composed of several senses. We said that we classically segregate it into few stages, and we concentrated on on two of them. So today we're going to talk a little bit about integration, and just we'll touch a really tiny bit about perception at the end of the talk if we have time. So I remind you that we have some mechanoreceptors under the skin or in the skin, and then each one of them is connected to an axon that goes through the dorsal root ganglion, gets into the spinal cord, then climbs up, crosses over, and then continues to climb, go to the thalamus, and then from the thalamus to the cortex. So that's the main pathway that we're talking about. And we talked a little bit about the fact that we have different types of receptors, slowly adaptive and rapidly adaptive, and two kinds of each, superficial and deep in the skin, and they are connected through these fibers, which are the A alpha, A beta, A delta, and the C fibers, which are slow and unmyelinated, compared to the alpha fiber, which are the fastest and the are myelinated. And okay, we said that we have different segments, and the segments are corresponding to the vertebra because each vertebra, I don't know how you say it. I think this is in plural, right? Anyway, the kol chulia, you have one root on each side where the nerves are actually going out, and the nerves are, they're composed of the sensory nerve that comes in and the motor nerves that are going out through this root, and that's another picture of the same thing. Each one of these mechanoreceptor or muscle spindles that's coming from the muscles that we'll talk about next time, or some sensation is going through what's called free nerve ending. It's just an axon that branches, and all these are going through the ganglion, going into the root, and then climbing through the dorsal root column. We did that, and we talked about how this creates a homunculus, right? Okay, so this year it's maybe less attractive, this next few slides, because you already know all the Santi-Schmanti techniques that we can use today in neuroscience, but still I wanted to show you one example, because all this subject of the periphery of the somatosensory system is not, let's say, it's not one of the major areas today in neuroscience. Not that many people are working on that, and the people who do it mainly in the context of pain, which is a huge subject, but it's a completely different one, or it's a relatively different one. Phantom pain, in general pain, you'll have a lecture from Alex, that is in Elset, but he's speaking in Adasa in the other campus in Ankara, and he's working on pain, and he will tell you a lot about it, fascinating things that are going on there. It is a major subject because, such a huge population of of people are suffering from pain. In some ways, everybody is going through some periods where they suffer from pain, so it's obviously an important issue, and a lot of it is not understand. We don't understand. Um, some of it is actually not related to the periphery. That's maybe some of what you hinted for. That that pain. I'll leave it to Alex to explain in detail. But pain originates in the periphery, but it can actually be later on somehow transferred to other places, and actually the periphery can even not exist, and you still feel the pain as if it comes from the periphery. So it's a very very complicated issue. But here I wanted to show you how modern techniques could be used still to study things like somatosensation in details that were not possible before. So this is a paper, the details of the paper are here. It's a paper that is following another paper where this group found that there is a specific type of receptor, I don't even know how to pronounce the name of this receptor, that expressed specifically on subtype of C fibers. So C fibers are these axons that are unmyelinated, that comes from the periphery. So here they generated two mice, Cree-line mice, one with these subtypes. You see this MRGPB4, and the other one with a D version of the receptor instead of the 4. So you have like two lines, and they injected an AAV lox GCAP3 virus to the spinal cord. Sorry, not to the spinal cord, but I think they did inject it to the spinal cord. And then what you get, so GCAP, everybody knows GCAP? After the talk, fancy talk last week. So GCAP is a calcium indicator, and what you get is a mouse where the C fibers, either the ones that express this subtype of receptor or the D subtype of the receptor are expressing GCAP. And now you can do some histology to check for that. But what they do here is a two-photon microscopy from the spinal cord of these mice, either by injecting ATP at the terminal, like in the skin, or by injecting KCl, just drops of KCl on the spinal cord. Why would they do that? KCl is easy. Why KCl? I'll give you a hint. They want to record activity, so they pour KCl. Why?
Changes the nerve equation of the potassium in the threshold is going down, something like this.
All right. So basically, what holds neurons that hyperpolarized potential is because you have a high potassium inside the cell and low potassium outside the cell. Right? That's the main battery that affects neuron at rest in myelopathy. So if you increase potassium outside, you change the balance of potassium inside and outside. Basically, you shift the battery of potassium more towards threshold, and you artificially depolarizing the neuron without actually the axon in this case, without actually having to do anything, right? Obviously, what you would do would be to express also channel adoption and activate them, but this is not okay. This is like the poor version of doing that. You put KCl. Usually, if you put KCl on a neuronal tissue, it will depolarize and emit more action potentials, and you can see the transients here, and you can see that this expression works, and they can record calcium signals signals from the axons. Okay, so this is the interesting slide of this paper, and what you can see here is that they apply two types of stimulations. One is a pinch, and the other one is brush. Okay, so they brush the hair of the mouse, or they pinch the skin, and you see that so you have like these two receptors. So this is one line of the mouse, and this is the other line of the mouse. And on this line, you get calcium transient when you brush, but you don't get, sorry, when you pinch, but you don't get when you brush. Okay, brushing, so these are the epochs of brushing. No signal at all. These are the epochs of pinching. You get big signals. Okay? And if you do on the other, you do the same thing on the other line, you brush or you pinch, you get for brushing these strong signals, and for pinching you don't get anything. Okay? So basically, these two types of receptors, which are expressing on two different types of fibers, are transmitting different kind of information that is related to the sensory stimulus. And one of them, this one, it corresponds to the brushing. And it's interesting. First of all, we talked before about. I told you like that the somatosensory system is highly related to pleasure. So this is kind of a hint that this is indeed coming from the somatosensory. But interestingly enough, it doesn't come through the mechanoreceptor that we talked about before. It comes through a different pathway, which is even unmyelinated. And there's also kind of some it makes sense that when you do this brushing, stroking, whatever you call it, it's not you don't need like very good temporal resolution. You don't need very high speed of conducting the signal. So it could be, well be going through C fibers slowly, and it's not shouldn't actually surprise us completely. Okay, so now they wanted to test. Okay, let's ask him here because we already know the answer. They want to test if this indeed is a pleasurable signal. If indeed the mice, if you like, enjoy this stroking, and indeed this comes through this type of pathway. Okay, so what would you do? You do a behavioral experiment, obviously. What kind of?
The reward, uncheck it.
Sorry? Yes.
The positive reinforcement.
Okay.
The mouse wants to repeat that by doing
You
that.
stimulate him at the like see if he goes to the place where you stimulate him.
Okay, so something like that. But if you stimulate, stimulate what? The fibers.
Yeah.
Okay, so like the stroking is obvious, is obvious, but you want to see if indeed if you increase the stimulation of these fibers, would it create some bias that you can actually observe? So what they do is they use this cage where you have like a neutral place, and then you have two different chambers that the mouse can distinguish by, say, the stripe on the walls of the chamber, and then they express, in this case, they express a dread, conditioned on the same receptors. They express dread in these fibers. Okay, so the dread you also heard of, right? So if in this case, if you inject CNO, you activate these fibers. And what you see here is you see the initial preference of the mouse. Okay, pre and post. So the initial preference. No.
Initial is in the middle.
No, Okay, so what they do is that they let, sorry, so they let the mouse get in the cage, and the mice, each one of them has some preference to the stripe being horizontal or being vertical. Okay, so for each mouse, they inject the CNO in the non-preferable location. Okay, so this is how much time they spend in the initial non-preference chamber before and after they injected CNO, and this is with saline. Okay, so you see that the mice will increase the time that they change that they stay in the place where they initially didn't want to stay, and this kind of supports the assumption.
They knew what gene codes the specific kind of.
Yeah, so this whole thing is based on the fact that they found that these C fibers are specialized in the fact that they express this receptor, and no other fibers do apparently. So they wanted basically to check what these fibers are good for and what kind of information they are.
Usually it's not part of the rule that mouse wants to be in, like the preference, because it's
so the mouse initially, say the mouse initially doesn't like to be in this site. So this is the INP, the initially or whatever non-preferable chamber.
yeah, that's why I'm asking, because usually it looks smaller on this one.
So apparently they usually spend more time in one of the chambers than in the neutral state. Probably because they have some rewater or something. Water or whatever. I guess. I don't know why, but apparently they spend more time here than each one.
So CNO is the designer drug in this.
CNO is the designer drug. Yeah, I mean the drug thing is like it's a designer receptor exclusively activated by a designer drug, and all of them are activated by CNO. Or maybe there is another one. I know I only saw CNO. So the designer drug is one. The receptor could be many.
But CNO doesn't activate anything without.
No, CNO on its own doesn't do anything. Okay. Okay, so now we're going into the next step, which is like we're trying to get away from the periphery, but we get stuck there. So I want to go to the next step, which is integration of the integration of the somatosensory information, at least on the early stages. We'll start with the early stages. So I want to introduce you Adrian. Anyone heard of Adrian? Okay. So Adrian is kind of considered, so he won the Nobel Prize in 1932, and in some ways he's considered the father of neural coding. He was the first one to talk about how information is coded in the nervous system, and what I wanted to tell you, I told you already in the class on electrophysiology that in last lecture on these pictures of the oscilloscopes, I told you that there will be another version. So this is a version of Adrian from 26. So there are two papers. I actually cited you one, but there's another one which is Adrian and someone that I forgot his name. It's usually called the impulse produced by a sensory nerve ending 1 and 2. And in the first paper, this paper, he actually introduces the system that he's using, and what you see here is a muscle, okay, and the nerve that goes into and out of the muscle, and it's using two electrodes to measure like ground and reference and electrodes that are on this nerve, and he's using a system that he basically built himself, to amplify the signal. This system, I think, amplifies up to something like 1,000. Anyone knows what this is? Someone must know this.
Can't see what you're pointing at.
This round thing here.
What, oh,
I don't know how they call it in English. זה מה שנקרא שפופרת רדיו.
radio tube,
What? A radio tube?
I think so.
Maybe. It's like this thing from a glass, and you have like a piece of metal and another wire that comes here, and basically, and the control, and this is basically the the version before the transistor. Before the transistor was invented, this was the first system that you could kind of amplify a signal by applying a control voltage. So you have like 3 of them here. And then what the interesting part is this thing. Here you had like a mercury tube with voltage. The amplified voltage goes over the mercury tube, and the mercury would go up and down depending on the voltage. And then you run a film running along so the mercury tube is here, and then you have a film running here, and basically makes a movie of the amplitude of the mercury, and this is the measurement of the voltage. Okay, this is how you measure the voltage. And this is what it would look like, and here you have this sinus wave, which I still haven't figured out how they made on this film, but this is the time. So this is used to take the time. And this is, I think, 1 kilohertz or something like that. And you get this kind of signal. So for example, you have this kind of something that looks like the Himalaya, or I don't know, what, like a Gini version. And these are the signals that you measure from the fiber. And then they did like, they went over that with a pen and paper, with a pen, and they would kind of get these traces. Okay? And this is what he got the Nobel Prize for, because he realized from these traces, first of all, a lot of stuff. And I'll just give you one example, but in the second paper, which is the more interesting one, this is more like technical, what they found out is that they found a specific specific nerve muscle that was innervated only by something like 13, 12, 15 fibers, and only 3 or something like that was sensory fiber coming out of the muscle. So I told you like there's this sense which is called proprioception, and tells you about the length of muscle. We'll talk about it next week. So they kind of assume that from this muscle you get only few fibers that tells you on the length of the muscle. So what they did is they put a silk wire on this side of the muscle and put some weight, and they could kind of change the length of the muscle, and then measure what's going on in these nerves. And these nerves are motor and sensory. Okay, so they know that there is no motor command because they control the system. So anything that goes on there is a sensory impulse that comes from the nerve. So what they basically found out is kind of illustrated in this figure, although this is not the original data, and this is more like a cartoon version for what they found. But they found that based on this thing, and this is where the ingenuity comes in. So they figured out that it's like one, so that action potential comes as a single event, and the main conclusion was that there is a relation between the frequency of the spikes, of the action potentials, and the length of the force that they apply on the muscle. And this was the base for what we're calling rate coding. And the idea is that the information is transmitted in the rate. So for example, if you have a small stretch, you'll get a small number of action potential per unit time. And if you have a the duration is proportional to the duration of the stimulus. Okay, one important thing about that paper was that they put the weight on the muscle and then they waited 10 seconds before they started rolling the thing. So they said they wanted the system to get to a steady state. And what happens when you do that?
Stasis? The
Yes.
downside of the...
Basically, I mean, it's not a fair question, but if you remember this figure, right? There's no way you can actually measure these things when you wait for 10 seconds, right? So you're only sensitive to these type of stimuli, right? So they were kind of, at least at the beginning, they were kind of biased towards measure signals that they don't care about time. I mean, they couldn't do much better than that anyway. And
But that's what they wanted, right? They wanted to ignore transient effects, which might ignore. So they wanted to ignore them.
yes, but by ignoring them, you kind of ignore them, right?
Yeah.
It's very important that you ignore them. So I mean, I'm not going to criticize them in any way. I just want to note to notice that this kind of coding is obviously exists and it's obviously important, and it was kind of it started the whole idea of neural coding, so how neurons with spikes encode information. So when Adrian did that, it wasn't clear at all that it wouldn't be like the amplitude of the action potential that would carry the signal. Okay, so you didn't know, no one knew how signals are transducted from like force to neural signals. So he came up with this idea, and this idea became very important, and it is still important in many ways that you will see, and you already saw in the visual system, in the auditory system. That's what most people measure. They measure firing rate of neurons. Okay, and all the neural network models are working on firing rate of models. This is what firing rate of neurons came from. Okay, that's what I wanted you to know. Okay. And now we're going to trash it in one slide. I'm joking, but okay. So in this case, what I wanted to tell you is that once these inputs are going through the nerve, you remember that there are stations where neurons are doing synapses, and I just wanted, I'm sure you talked about it in the visual system, but just in case you don't know these very few important terms, I want to mention them, so we're all clear that you are on board with that. So if you imagine that you have this centering neuron, and each one of them is sending, or I don't know, think of that as postillion corpuscles, all right? Each one of them is sending one axon, and this axon is carrying information about the stimulus that it receives. When it comes to the medulla, and the neurons are doing the first synapse, okay? The axons split. They don't do one synapse per one neuron. Do you know cases where you have that? One synapse per one neuron? Fovea, no. I mean, you have the bipolar cells in the retina, right? These are non-spiking cells, but okay, one case.
Motor system?
Not that I know of.
Antiglomeruli?
Where?
In the olfactory system?
Don't think so. I don't think so. No.
But there's a cellular.
Okay, you heard about the calyx of hell?
The what?
Calyx of hell. Okay, so in the auditory system, did Ali talk to you about this? How do you do sound localization?
We didn't study.
You didn't study auditory system. So in the auditory system, there's one very, very important synapse, very, very famous one. It's it's a neuron that is making one synapse from the postsynaptic cell. Every presynaptic spike makes a postsynaptic spike. It has 200 release sites. 200 boutons, so it's like it's a giant synapse. There's one more giant synapse like that, even bigger. Sliding fiber in the cerebellum. We'll talk about it next year as well. But these things are extremely rare, especially in mammals, where you have one synapse going to one neuron. Usually the axon split, okay, and making many synapses. What does it mean? It means that now, when you think about this neuron, it's not getting information only from one location on the skin. It integrates information from many locations. So you have this, on one hand, divergence. So the information is split into different locations, and each one of them has some convergence, meaning that it has information that is collected from many cells. I mean, you're learning neural networks, you know what you can do with things like that. It's important, and it's powerful, and you don't really understand how they really work. You just think it's okay. That's one thing. Second thing is inhibition. So usually everywhere, every place where you have these kind of stations, where you have synapses like that occurring, you also have inhibitory interneurons. Because they're interneurons, because they usually stay local with the axons. So the excitatory neuron sends information all over through the spinal cord, between the two sides of the cortex. Inhibitory neurons, with few exceptions, usually stay local within the region. So they're called interneurons. And then, again, it's just a matter of terms, but if you haven't heard about it, feed-forward inhibition, you heard about it? No. What is feed-forward inhibition? Okay, you have a picture here. Okay, so feed-forward inhibition is this case where you have a neuron, it sends its axon, okay, say on this excitatory postsynaptic neuron, but it also sends it makes a synapse on an inhibitory neuron that is making inhibition on another neuron. So basically, if you follow the flow of information, it will go, the excitation will go like that, and here you basically get some kind of inhibition, feed-forward inhibition. So it comes, this neuron would fire when this neuron is fired. So actually, I have to excuse myself, because I told you before that these huge synapses that are making one connection, like only one synapse on a postsynaptic neuron, in inhibitory cells, although this inhibitory interneuron can get many synapses, usually they are very small neurons, and then very few inputs can trigger them. Okay, so sometimes, if this neuron would fire a burst of like 5 action potential in a short time, it can trigger on its own, even though this can receive like 1,000 inputs, 1,000 synaptic inputs, other than this one. This synapse on its own can trigger this neuron. Okay? And obviously, you know that this is just a cartoon, because when the information is going, it's not going only on one axon. There are like 100 neurons that are doing that at the same time. So it's likely that this inhibitory neuron will be excited by many others at the same time. So the inhibition is kind of flowing with the direction of the excitation. So this is feed-forward inhibition. Feedback inhibition is kind of the idea that you kind of feed back the inhibition through an inhibitory neurons to your neighbors, for example. So for example, this neuron is active, is sending the information this direction to the thalamus, but at the same time it can inhibit other neurons locally in the same region. Okay, feedback inhibition. And then descending inhibition. What is descending inhibition? What?
From down, from the brain to the spinal cord.
Yeah, so in this case, in this case, descending inhibition is inhibition that comes from the cortex, or from the brainstem, or from the cerebellum, and going, it's excitation that's going on local inhibitory neurons. examples. One example for is the, you know, the Babinski reflex. Anyone heard about it? Only the mothers. No kidding. Anyone that is somehow, so babies, when you do for a baby on the feet, you do stroke like that. What?
No, they do the opposite. They do like this.
No, the babies do that, okay? Until I think something like few months, they would do that. The toes will, the fingers will go up. And then at some point it flips and they start doing that. Okay? And the reason is that at the beginning, they have a reflex that does that. So it goes through the spinal cord. You activate the reflex. The information from the skin goes to the spinal cord and activate motor neurons that will pull the fingers up. Okay? At some point, these neurons are being constantly inhibited by the cortex or by the brainstem. Okay, and then these pathways all the time inhibiting these neurons that are responsible for this reflex, and another pattern overcomes this reflex. Okay, so what happens usually for people who are going through, say, an accident, okay, and they have like a cut in the projection from the cortex to the spinal cord, the reflex, the Babinski reflex will show up again. So one of the first things that paramedics comes, like for when you have a motorcycle accident, one of the first things that they will do this Babinski, because the person could be like unconscious in a way, right? Or kind of lightly conscious, so that you can't actually communicate with them, but they can check, you know, whether there is spinal cord injury, yes or no, by doing the Babinski effect. People who are in coma in hospital, many times you see the doctor comes and checks. You know, this is like a very first indication if the cortex is taking, if the brain is taking control back on the spinal cord. Okay, so so it is a general phenomenon that the spinal cord is under huge and constant inhibition from higher areas in the cortex. This is part of the motor system, but it's also true for the somatosensory system in the sense that your cortex can kind of control what kind of information it receives from the periphery. Okay, in the same sense that it can inhibit not only motor neurons, but also inhibit neurons that are transmitting information from the spinal cord to the cortex. So, the different modes of inhibition, the feed-forward inhibition, feedback inhibition, and descending inhibition. I just want to mention one more. One more interesting case of feed-forward inhibition that we might see some of it today. So imagine the case where you have like a neuron that sends the axon and makes a synapse here. And the axon split and makes a synapse on an inhibitory neuron. But now, this inhibitory neuron is not going to another neuron, but it's actually projecting on the same neuron. Okay, so you have a synapse like that. So this actually seems like a self-defeating mechanism, right? You know, if you try to activate the neuron and at the same time you kind of inhibit it, what's the point?
You need this inhibition at the time.
So you need this inhibition, that's one thing, right? It could be. But what else? Right, so one thing is that sometimes, if you I don't know, from an engineering point of view, it's easier to control, say, a position of something if you push and pull at the same time. Okay, so you kind of, if you have like if you have a string, right, and you have something in the middle of the string and you want it at a certain position, it's easier to work when the string is stretched. Okay, and you move the two sides, or if you just pull one and you have like all kinds of flags and stuff. So really, from just mechanical point of view, you'll see many times that when you design a 3D printer, you don't have like one motor that moves, you have two that kind of control. Okay, that's one thing. So this is kind of, you control the excitation inhibition at the same time. So this is not exactly the best model for that, but you'll hear about it a lot, about push-pull models. So like you have excitation and inhibition that are working against each other. But what you have here is the thing that you ignore is the temporal domain. Okay, so this works fast, and this takes a little bit more time. So if you have a spike coming here, and a spike going on the axon, it will arrive to this one before and to here at the same time, more or less. But here it has to activate the synapse, to cross the threshold, to go through the axon, to activate another synapse. This takes time. Okay, so what happens is usually, if you activate a system like that, without the inhibition, okay, you get an EPSP. Okay? Without this excitation, you get an IPSP. Okay? It could be even stronger than the EPSP. Okay? But when you join all of them together, what you see is something, okay, I'll draw it here. The excitation starts, and then it cuts. Okay, so you get something like that. Okay? And what's the advantage of that? The advantage is that you limit the time of the excitation to a narrow time window. Okay, so if you want to, for example, if the threshold is somewhere here, and you need to summate several synapses in order to get to threshold, you have a narrow time window in order to summate them, and you can be more precise in terms of time. Okay, everybody follow? So this is another case where you have feed-forward inhibition in order to make a narrow time window. You want to go?
And just, I mean, why, maybe we have it in many other systems as well, but if not, so why do you need it, especially here?
No, that's a
That's
very general slide to kind of talk about this possible integration mechanism on the way. I'll show you one example similar to this very soon, specific to somatosensory.
So it says the inhibitory interneurons, they have many inputs. They receive inputs from many neurons, and one is EPSP is enough for them to fire.
Not
right?
one, but usually you can activate them through one. Many times you can activate them through one axis.
It's like they have a very low threshold.
Yes, or more like they have a very high input resistance.
High what?
High input resistance. So they kind of for the so input resistance means how much current you need to inject in order to generate, like, you know.
Size of the spine?
No. So input resistance is basically a resistance, and it measures how much current you need in order to make a change in voltage of the cell. So if you have 1 megaohm input resistance, okay, 1 megaohm input resistance, it means that 1 nanoamp will give you 1 millivolt. Okay. If you have 100 megaohm, so like pyramidal neurons in the cortex are usually on the order of 30 megaohm. Okay, so you need something like 300 picoamps in order to get, to get 10 millivolts. Okay? These neurons are usually 1 gigaohm or 2 gigaohms input resistance. So they're like something like 100 times more stronger, okay, than usual neurons. So you need way less synapses in order to activate.
But
Why?
What is the physical? So now I have two questions. What is the physical property that underlies the input resistance? Because I thought it's the shape of the spine.
So first of all, these ones don't have spines usually, because the inhibitory neurons usually they don't have spines. So spines are almost always for excitatory synapses, and for only excitatory neurons. Second, it's a lot has to do with the size of the neuron. So a neuron that is bigger will have lower input resistance, because you have a lot of membrane. You have to charge a lot of membrane. It takes a lot of ions to do. If you have a smaller membrane, the spine is a good example. A spine is a very small structure. It has because it has a tiny amount of membrane. You want to change the voltage over the spine. You don't need a lot of charge.
Okay. And okay, the original thing I want to ask, so these internals, do they fire like all the time? Do they fire a lot because they are so easy to stimulate and they have so
So
many
there are
inputs?
different type of interneurons. Some of them do fire a lot. Some of them fire spontaneously a lot. But there are like there are billions of types of them. So it's really difficult to generalize. But they're usually called fast spiking interneurons because the spikes are very, very narrow, and they can make many of them very, very, like in a very fast firing rate. So they can go 300, 400, 500 hertz. Like every two, like, they have one spike, 1 millisecond break, another spike, another millisecond break goes up. So they can fire fast, and they typically many of them are tonically active. They're spiking all the time. Okay, so here is so we talked about Adrian, and we talked about firing rate. And now I want to give you an example where firing rate is not the whole story. Okay, so information is not coded only on the average number of spikes that is transmitted, but up to this paper, it was almost always assumed that if there is a role in spike timing, it's in the cortex, it's some higher level. Sensory inputs are always fine grade, that's the code. Okay, so this paper was trying to break the dogma, and the idea is the following: they take a finger, cut it, no, I'm kidding, and put some kind of mechanism that can apply force on the skin in 5 directions, if you like. So one is just perpendicular to the finger, and then they can apply it to right, left, up and down. Okay? So all the directions here, and they have also different size and shape of this probe that apply the force. Okay, and then the experiment is that they give some brain, and then they press against the finger, and then they wait, and then they retract. They take it back. Okay, and what you see here, all these dots. So this is where the force is applied, and all these dots are the locations of the receptive field of the fibers that they afterwards record into. Okay, so you have fast adaptive 1, slow adaptive 1, slow adaptive 2, and they kind of they measure they measure. I think they measure from here, but I'm not sure. Maybe they measure down even more further away, and they do these recordings where you kind of record single spikes. So what you see here are example recordings from 3 different receptor types where the force is applied. So you see here, this is like an example from fast adaptive 1 receptor that is located here on the finger. You see it from above and from the side, from below and from the side, and here this is the location where the force is applied. And you see another example here where the receptive field is much closer to the place where the receptor the probe is pressing. And what you see here are 5 different repetitions, five different repetitions of the stimulus. Okay, and and for the different directions. And what you see is that when the force starts to apply, so this is about like 75 milliseconds or so, you start to get spikes. These are fast adaptive, right? These are slowly adaptive, and these are also slowly adaptive. But the force is not very strong, and it's not a lot of time, so you don't get that many spikes per stimulus. Okay, so yourself, how do I differentiate between the different directions? This is kind of the coding question. Okay, I have five different stimuli, and I have reactions, and how do I differentiate? So classically, you could say, I have more spikes here than here and than here, and this what would help me. This is what Adrian will tell you would kind of change the pattern or differentiate between the different stimuli. Okay? But what they want to show is that there's enough variability between the latency of the first spike. Okay, you see here the latency to the first spike differentiates already almost exclusively between the conditions. Okay, here you see less of that, but here you see as well, and here you see also somewhat of that. Okay, so what you see here is a quantification of that. So different directions, and here you see different recording area. Okay, and here you see the latency to the first spike. How much time did it take until the first spike occurred on this fiber? Okay, and you see that for the slowly adaptive and the slowly adaptive 2 fiber, and what they did, they took all this data and they put it into kind of a classification algorithm, which was trying to predict, based on the data that you get from this recording, what kind of direction you were moving to. And you see that for a first spike, to make a clear distinction, based only on the first spike, it takes you something like 50 upframes. So if you listen to 50 axons, okay, and you want to tell which direction the stimulus was going to, was going, you need 50 fibers, and then it's enough to have one spike, and you can make the decision, right? The same thing is a similar number for the slowly adaptive 2, and and again similar number or even lower for the slowly adaptive slowly adaptive 2. Okay, so this is slowly adaptive 1. So if you look at many fibers, you don't really need to look at the average firing rate. It's enough to look at the first spike, and you know everything you need to know. Okay, so the idea is the following. Here is another example, like a cartoon that explains this idea. So imagine that you have now this finger, and there are many axons going from this finger. And now, at one point, you press against a round shape, and on the other one on a flat shape. Okay, this thing on its own, first of all, means that each one of these receptors feels a little bit different pressure. Okay, because obviously this will feel less pressure on the round one than on the flat one. Okay, so there is a different distribution of pressure over the hand. That's one thing. Okay, so each one of them now, for these two, and the other thing that happens is that they stretch the skin in a different way. So the ones on the edges, even receptors here that doesn't touch each one of them, gets a different force because of this process. Okay? So now each one of the axons will fire a spike, but at a different time for each one of these stimuli. Okay? So it will fire more than one spike, but now we're looking only on the first spike. So each one of them will tell you like a different pattern of the first spike depending on the stimulus. Okay, and then these spikes will continue to travel on the axon, more or less maintaining this difference in time. So in each case of them, so this pattern will maintain more or less the same or differently. It doesn't really matter along the track. Now, when you go to the first place where you have integration, okay, when you have convergence of input, you can think about these neurons as an array of neurons that receives, each one of them receives input from some, but not all of the presynaptic fibers. Okay, so what's the difference between them? So this neuron will get input from these three fibers, and this one will from these three fibers. Okay? What will happen is that if you look at these inputs, and you're now looking at like coincidence, okay, so this fiber, and this fiber happens to fire at the same time. Okay? So this is exactly what happens here. So this red neuron, by chance, will be activated only when these three axons will fire at the same time. Okay? And this blue one will be activated when these three will be activated at the same time. And then these two neurons will basically tell you whether it was this stimulus or that stimulus, just because these are the only ones that are going to activate, and they will be activated only when they are activated at the same time. So for these, if you have a narrow temporal window for integration, and they are sensitive to coincidence of inputs at the same time, you can distinguish between these two inputs based on the phase spike. You don't have to wait, count spikes, and use the average firing rate on each one of these fibers. It's enough to look for the first spike.
But the first time, the first spike in each of the receptors, right? Not only one.
Yeah.
And another question: what mechanism of the mechanisms that we went through is responsible that the neuron will react only for 3 stimulations and not only 2, for example?
Okay, so this is something that we'll talk about next year. But for example, this can help you with that. Right? This presynaptic, so the speed forward inhibition that narrows the integration time window means that each synapse only contributes a small EPSP, smaller than it used to be, okay, EPSP, and only in a very short time window. So only if you get like some of them together,
then I'll pass this very
then you can process them. Alright, okay. How are we on time? Oh, wow. Okay. It was so interesting, huh? Okay, so let's take a break and continue to talk at some 45. מה הם אומרים, כי אני לא זוכר. אני כותב את זה. הדבר השני הדבר השלישי כבר. זה אחד המאמרים הראשונים שמראה קוזליטי. למדתם על ניוטון, עם הרנדום דוט שמזיזים ימינה או שמאלה ונותנים מיקרוסטימולציה.
כן, ואז ההחלטה משתנה בהתאם למיקרוסטימולציה, זאת אומרת, הנוירונים האלה אשכרה חשובים.
בדיוק, אז מה שהם עושים כאן, הם עושים מיקרוסטימולציה, אתם מחליפים או את F1 מיקרוסטימולציה, או את F2, או F1 או F2. הרעיון הוא ש-F1 עוקב שה-S1 עוקב כל כך טוב אחרי הפריקוונסי, שאתה יכול פשוט להחליף את זה במיקרוסטימולציה, הוא לא ידע שבאמת לא קיבל את האינפוט, ולכן אתה מקבל, אתה יכול להחליף את F2 או את כאן עשו אחד מהם ב-F2 ואחד מהם ב-F1, וכאן הם הצליחו את שניהם אני חושב, גם F1 וגם F2 במיקרוסטימולציה, או כאן אחד מהם מחליפים, בקיצור הם יכולים להחליף כמעט את כולם פה, אני חושב שהם צריכים לקבל את כולם, אבל לא זה כבר, כאן זה לא עובד.
זה לא יודע איך לקרוא זה.
אוקיי, בסדר, אז זה עוד נקודה שחשוב להדגיש על זה, שהם כאילו לקחו את זה כל, זה עשיתי שנה לפני אופרנטי, ובכל זאת אחת הדוגמאות היחידות אני חושב לקוזליטי. So, I want to, I have to squeeze an hour in 30 minutes, so I'll do it fast. What you can follow, just go to at least in this slide, it's really all in the book and there's nothing special that I'm going to tell you. I completely skipped the thalamus. I even skipped the slide that used to say thalamus. And we're just going straight to cortex. And in cortex, as we talked about before, the primary S1, primary somatosensory cortex, is arranged along the central sulcus, just opposite the motor cortex. And we have this homunculus spreading out around, along the primary somatosensory cortex. And it's typically split into three. You see here like 3, 1, and 2, like three stripes. Well, basically you don't have one homunculus, you have like three of them. Okay, 1 in 3, 1 in 1 in 1, and 1 in 2. Each one of them is kind of it's a part of this primary somatosensory cortex. If you follow the information from the periphery, the first, the fastest information, or the primary information, go through area 3A, or in general area 3, where it gets information from different locations in the thalamus with VPL or VPM. It depends in rats or humans. Humans usually they call it VPL. The information goes to 3A through 3 to area 3 through this pathway, but in parallel it also goes to area 1 in area 2, and also it goes laterally in the cortex from 3A to 3B to 1 to 2. Okay? And then you have a secondary somatosensory area. You also have this area called area 5. So these are the higher somatosensory areas, like you have in the visual system, and T and B4 and B2 and whatever. Okay, and then I promised you, I think last time, I mentioned Vernon Mountcastle, and I mentioned that he was the first one to identify this idea of the cortical column, and this is no, this is not what I wanted to show you. This is what I want to show you. So basically, Mountcastle recorded from fibers that are responding to the Cassinian corpuscle, and he knew that because he was stimulating at around 200 Hz, and the Cassinian corpuscle is the only one that actually transmits this information. And we talked about it last time. Okay? And what you see here is a recording when they do penetration in the cortex, different tracts of electrodes. So you see here, this electrode is going down this direction, and every time you have a line here, up to the right side, it says deep. It means the deep neuron. Basically, information that is going fast adaptive receptor deep in the skin or on the surface of the skin. So the surface is going the other direction. And what you see is when you penetrate with the electrode perpendicular to the cortex, to the surface of the cortex, you get units. Every time you get a line, it means that you have a neuron at this location that was responding. So you go down, 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 and you keep encountering neurons all responding to the same stimulus. Okay? You do it again here, you get the same result. You do it again here, you get the same result. Then if you do it here, you see that at times it suddenly switches to different type of response. Okay? Again here, you go down, it's all deep. Then suddenly it's superficial, deep. Okay, so the idea was when they started to see that, they're kind of starting to develop the idea that when you go perpendicular to the cortex, you get the same type of information, the same type of processing, the same type of responses, and they started to develop this idea of the cortical column. And few years later, this was like in the early 60s, few years later, Hubel and Wiesel showed the orientation columns and made it, on some sense, much more clear. They got the Nobel Prize and physics. Okay. Okay, what kind of receptive field? I don't need to explain to you what is a receptive field. We talked about it also in somatosensory system. Primary sensory areas in the cortex have obviously more complicated receptive fields than in the periphery, because information is being integrated on the way, and this is kind of the responses that you can see in the cortex. For example, you heard about this STRF, but I'm not going to talk too much about it because Eli is going to probably mention it. No, I'm not. I know that it's written there. Just asking if you have heard this term. Okay, so in visual systems, they mostly kind of talk about special receptive fields, right? So which place on the wall of the visual field excites this neuron, and which is inhibiting this neuron, okay? And what's exciting this neuron in terms of space. So sometimes time is also important, okay? So special temporal receptive field is kind of, this is where space is represented, and sequentially is where time is represented. Okay, so what you can see here, for example, is what we call replacing inhibition receptive field, meaning that if you touch this area on the skin, you'll get activation in cortex. Okay, but later, to excite, the touch on this same location will inhibit the neuron. Okay, so you get inhibition replacing excitation in the same location. Okay, sometimes you just get kind of desensitization. So it's harder to excite this neuron from the same location, and sometimes you have surround inhibition. Okay, so you have like excitation that is becoming surrounded and replaced eventually by inhibition. And then, okay, what happens beyond S1? Beyond S1, you start getting neurons that are, not surprisingly, starting to be sensitive to more complex types of information. For example, in this experiment, what you do is you put a stimulus that is composed of different bars that you can place on the finger, and you can place them in different orientation and in different location on the finger. Okay, so what you see here is orientation, and what you see here is relative to a certain point, you see kind of if it was moved to the right or to the left. So you have all the combinations of location, and orientation, and you see this neuron has a preference to a certain orientation and at a certain location. Okay, more or less. It likes more this orientation than others, and it likes more this location than others, but it basically has a combined complicated receptive field where it kind of responds here, okay, to this combination of orientation and location, and it is being inhibited over here. So if you place this vertical orientation and along the middle, it kind of tends to be inhibited. So neuron, when you go higher, obviously in the hierarchy, the receptive fields become more and more complicated. So these days, the model system to somatosensory in cortex, we almost always talk about bulb cortex, and not clearly because you study somatosensory, but anyway, it is a somatosensory system, so let's talk about it like that. So, I'm sure you heard about bulb cortex before, right? Anyone hasn't heard about it?
The what?
About the bulb cortex. Whisker system, bulb cortex. Okay. So basically, the whiskers of the rodents are very, very well organized. So much so that you have actually a specific name for a specific whisker. If you look at them from the side, you have 5 rows, A, B, C, D, and E. Each one of them has several whiskers, and they have numbers starting from 1 here and going upwards here. And there's 4 additional ones, which is called alpha, beta, gamma, and delta, that are kind of located in between the lines and to the back. And rodents actually can do many things with the whiskers. That basically is the second primary sense after function. In some sense, they use it a lot, and there are all kind of behavioral tasks that you can kind of show that they can do with them. For example, you can do texture discrimination. You can give them 2 different textures, and they can discriminate between 2 textures with 1 whisker. Okay? They can also do this gap crossing, which means that you put them in the dark, and they can judge just by telling whether you they touch the other location. Can they jump over and go over the gap? But so typically people thought that all they do is kind of rhythmically move the whiskers back and forth, and they use that. So this is of course. Okay, so before we talk about it, they move the whisker back and forth, and they kind of use that to extract information. And then they started to use high-speed cameras, and what you see here is a rat that is going in complete darkness on a platform, and there's a wall here that it cannot see. Okay, and I hope it will work. And there are 2 things to notice. One is that when it goes, it touches the ground. It kind of taps on the ground in order to know if it can walk there. Okay? And the second is that you notice is when it touches with the whisker, it goes with the whiskers like that. It feels the wall, and it knows where to stop, and just at the point when the snout is touching the screen. Okay, so here's one example. Sorry, this is like high speed again, and what you see is that the rat can actually withdraw all these whiskers to the back while still whisking with these ones. Okay, so it has individual control on each one of them. So it's not like they're doing all the time. These things, if they touch this will kind of help them in a way. They don't like that. They want to protect them. So they take them back and they continue with the other side. And this is the other movie that I promised you. So you see that it goes, they kind of touch, and once they touch, you see it now in slow motion, even slower motion. It touches and it knows how to stop exactly on the spot, right? So from this one touch that it touched the whiskers, it knows exactly where the wall is. Okay, so they really know how to use this to use these whiskers extremely well to extract information.
Is any of this like reflex?
What do you mean?
Like a very short, does it have to enter the cortex in order for this to happen?
This one I don't know. I can tell you that some people did, okay, so I don't know if I'll have time to show you today, but the first experiments in rodents that used head-fixed animals and teaching them to do things were done with parallel cortex with whiskers. And people went through many tasks until they actually figured out the tasks that require cortex. So some tasks they can do without cortex. And I think I showed you last time when I talked about the feedback loops how complicated it is. So there are many subcortical feedback loops. But you can design tasks that they cannot solve without cortex. The demand for. Okay, sorry. Rats are not. I wanted to give you a warning, but rats are not the only animals that are using whiskers, of course. The smallest rodent is called the shrew. Sorry, I don't think it's a rodent. I think it's a mammal, but I'm not sure it's a rodent. It's a shrew, and this one is the חתך, אני חושב קוראים לזה בעברית. This is like an animal that are eating cockroaches, and they do that only with the whiskers. They don't see it in complete darkness. So what I'm going to show you now, so I'll show you it in fast. It's better to see it in the dark because I don't see that it's relatively darkish. Okay, so you see it's very very quick. This is real time, and now you see it in slow motion. Look, you see the antenna touches the whiskers, and that's all the information it needs, and it goes. And obviously, it can also smell, but smell doesn't give you very good localization, right? So it was enough for the whiskers to touch the antenna, and they know what to do. Some people are actually interested in these animals because the brain is so much smaller than mice that it should be possible to image the whole brain, like with two-photon microscopy, the whole brain. And it's the only brain of a mammal that you can think of that you would be able to do with imaging. Okay, so what do we actually have there in the whiskers? What we have is it's a specialized hair. Okay, it sits in something called the follicle, and this base of the hair is actually wrapped with all kinds of nerve endings. Some of them are miracle endings. These are, I think, mostly the ones that transmit the information, but there are also others, and there are free nerve endings and all kinds of input. But it's important to note that there is no sensory, there's no mechanosensor on the whisker itself. It all comes from the base of the whisker. This is quite important because it's not that it touches something on the whisker and it knows where on the whisker it was touching. It needs to figure out from the curvature and from the forces on the whisker where it happened. Okay, and this is quite complicated, and physicists that spend years just to kind of do modeling of this whisker and all the forces and how the curvature is transmitted the force. And there's a paper came last year that claims that the complete difference between a whisker that is like a cylinder all the way through, or one that is getting narrower and narrower towards the tip. This would make a whole difference. I think it's. I can tell you that they can cut the whisker into half and they can still do what they need to.
Do they grow back the whisker?
They can grow back the whiskers, yes.
So just regular hair?
It's not regular hair, it's specialized hair, but they can still grow it. But if you take the whole thing and pull it, you can make damage here that is beyond repair. So it depends. If you just chop it here, it will grow. Okay. So the pathway is important to know. So there is again very similar to the somatosensory system. You have an axon that makes a nerve ending here on mechanoreceptors, and then it goes. So there is no dorsal root ganglion because it's coming from the face, so it's not in the spinal cord, but there's still a ganglion, and then there's this what's called trigeminal nucleus, where there is a synapse, with of course with splitting and everything, but schematically a synapse here. Then this axon, this neuron sends axon to the thalamus, to two different nuclei in the thalamus. One is called VPM and the other one POM. primary somatosensory cortex, but not just the somatosensory cortex, to a specialized area in the cortex that is called vagal cortex. Okay, what's that? This is the hippocampus. Right? So what you see here in black is this stain of layer 4, and you see that it kind of is segregated into different areas. And when you look at it from above, not from above the cortex, if you just cut layer 4, such that layer 4 is kind of flat, and you make a stain, you can see that for each one of these whiskers, you have a specialized area that is called the bar that correspond to it.
Is the vagal cortex part of the S1? It's in the same area of the S1? Or is it different?
It is in the same area of S1, but it's a subregion of S1,
Yes.
but it's called vagal cortex. So you cannot separate. In the atlas, you'll see S1 and vagal cortex. So S1 is everything apart from vagal cortex, but vagal cortex is part of the primary somatosensory area. So this is important because there are, yes.
Can we go to that?
Yes.
What is the other bell?
The other bars, they're just corresponding to other whiskers that we don't number. And they're small and kind of harder to identify. Yes.
Like, you know the experiment that cut the whiskers? I mean, you taught us a bit about that, but what does the brain area do when it doesn't get any input from the whiskers?
So usually what they do is I'll show you
We
a
just
slide.
taught the ones about like a specific synapse and how it affects it, but the entire area.
So usually what happens is that usually in this experiment what they do is they cut like 2 and 4, right, 3 and 1, so they do a checkerboard thing,
Yeah.
only half of the whiskers, and then what you see, and I'll show you later, is that you have an expansion, so they're kind of starting to take over the information. So neurons that will belong to VAL2 will now start responding to whisker from
And you
1.
said it's nothing, like no sensory input from that area. Is it taken by the sensory cortex?
I don't think so. Maybe if you do it early enough and for a long time, probably yes, but I don't know. Okay. So the vagal cortex is so this is an example why it is a nice system to study, because for example, what you can do, you can look at the skull from above, okay, take a picture, say with green light, and then you see very clearly all the blood vessels, okay, and now we can stimulate. So if the mouse skull is so thin that if you put a drop of water on it, it becomes transparent after a while. Okay, so if you put water, you can actually see the blood vessels on top of the brain, and then you can stimulate the whisker and take a picture when everything is illuminated in red, and then you see the oxygenation of the blood. Okay, and the bar that would be activated by activating a single whisker would show up. Okay, so you can actually do that, and this is okay, so just 1 second. You remember that last time I told you about the piezo, that it's this thing that you can apply voltage and move. This is a piezo. So you kind of, if you apply voltage here on these electrodes here, this will move and this will move the whisker, and then you can move one whisker, another whisker, and you see that the image actually moving along on the cortex. So before, if you want to record or you want to do imaging, you know exactly what is the place in cortex that you're going to record from. This is a huge advantage. For example, in visual cortex, usually you open the whole thing, then you have to start mapping receptive fields, because there is mapping, but between animals you can't tell which is going when. Okay? This is a crazy system that a guy, Daniel Schultz from France, built, where he can actually move each one of the whiskers of a rat in all dimensions. So it can go, each one of these piezo can go back and forth, up and down in any direction. So it's called the matrix. And they can kind of play whatever world they want into the brain of the okay. Okay, so that's okay. You can skip that. I just want to tell you that the bulk cortex is also a locus today for people who are doing anatomy of the cortical column and want to reconstruct all the type of neurons that you have there. This is another slide from that. We'll talk about it next year, so I'm going to skip that. And this is the kind of experiment he mentioned. Okay, so here's an example where you have a rat, and you want to actually study plasticity in cortex. This is one of the first papers to show that in the early 90s from a lab of a guy called Merzenich. I think it's here, but I'm not sure. Anyway, he was one of the first people to do that. And what they do here is they chop all the whiskers, okay, and they measure the response when they record in viral D2, they record the response to movement of D2 and D3. Okay, so these are the responses to D2. You see, this is what, here. Okay, this is called primary whisker, because when you record in D2, you get mostly responses and stronger responses from D2. Okay, you see it here. And smaller responses from D1 and D2. Okay? Now you apply glue and you just glue D2 and D1 together. So, D3 and D2 together. So now every time D2, all D3 whisker moves, basically both sides, both bars will get information. Okay? And what happens if you separate them after 64 hours, and now you record the responses, you see that suddenly now you get responses from D3. Okay, you get responses from D3 when you record in D2. Okay, so you somehow manage to create plasticity because they move together. They created some wiring between the bars or from the input, and you get you get information now in D2 that you didn't get response before, in D3 that you didn't get before. Okay, today you can also look at spines that are generated. I'm not going to talk about that. I'm not even on that. What I did want to show you is a cool technique. In this case, that was published from Adi Mizrahi's lab. And this is a very cool technique where what you do is it is called single cell electroporation. You go into a neuron in the brain of the mouse, and you record the activity for a neuron when you apply, in this case not piezo, just an air puff to the whiskers on one side or on the other side. So when you record here, what do you think you get? You record from the left hand side, would you get the contralateral side or the ipsilateral? Contra, right? So this is the ipsi, this is the contra, and you see that you get responses, or you can see it here. You get in the contralateral side, ipsilateral side, no responses, contralateral side, you get responses. What kind of technique is it? It's a pipette, but you get spikes. Cell attach recording. Okay, you go very close to the cell, you record only spikes, you don't record only potential. Okay, but in the pipette, you have, and it's blind, no two photon, nothing. Okay, up to this point, no two photon. Now you finish the recording. Okay, you make a very strong current. You wrap the membrane. You make a hole in the membrane, and you get plasmids into the neuron. Okay, plasmids for GFP. You wait 2 weeks. You take the electrode out. You wait 2 weeks. Okay? And then you come back, you open the skull with the window, with the glass window, okay, or not just agar, and you look into the brain and you see one neuron green, the whole brain. Okay? So you can actually label one neuron that you recorded from 2 weeks ago, and now you can come back